She was 9 years old when she learned that silence could scream louder than words. The house was always full, yet she had never felt so alone. Every night she listened to her parents argue in whispers, as if pain became lighter when spoken softly. One evening, her mother packed a small bag and kissed her forehead with trembling lips. "Be brave," she said. Those were the last words she ever heard from her. Years later, standing in the same doorway as an adult, she realized bravery wasn't about surviving the pain. It was about choosing not to pass it on. She closed the door gently, breaking a cycle that had lasted generations. The man everyone feared was once a boy who cried himself to sleep. They called him ruthless, cold, untouchable. What they never saw were the scars hidden beneath his shirt, or the letters he never sent to the father who abandoned him. When the town turned against him, he could have burned it all down. Instead, he walked away, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. Years later, when disaster struck, he was the first to return, carrying water, food, and forgiveness. Fear dissolved into shame, and his silence became the town's loudest lesson. She waited at the bus stop every evening, even after hope had grown tired. People whispered that she was crazy, that he was never coming back. But love doesn't follow logic. It follows memory. One rainy night, the bus finally stopped. A man stepped out, older, thinner, broken. He didn't recognize her at first. When he did, he collapsed into her arms and cried like a child. Sometimes love isn't about moving on. Sometimes it's about staying, even when the world tells you not to. He stole bread not because he was a thief, but because his sister was dying. When the shopkeeper caught him, the boy didn't run. He just stood there, shaking, waiting for punishment. Instead, the old man handed him a loaf and whispered, "I know what hunger feels like." Years later, the boy owned that same shop. On the wall hung a small sign, "If you're hungry, take what you need." Kindness had changed hands, and the debt was finally paid. They met in a hospital corridor where hope came and went like visiting hours. She was losing her mother. He was losing his wife. They spoke in fragments, stitched together by shared pain. When the losses finally came, they sat side by side in silence. Months later, they met again, not by chance, but by choice. Love didn't erase their grief, but it taught them how to live with it. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived gently, in borrowed smiles and quiet mornings. The letter arrived 20 years too late. By the time he read the words, "I was wrong," his father was already buried. Rage flooded him, followed by an emptiness deeper than hate. He wanted to tear the letter apart, but instead he folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. At the grave, he read it aloud, voice shaking, forgiving a man who would never hear it. He walked away lighter, understanding that forgiveness was never for the dead. It was for the living. She grew up believing love meant pain because pain was all she had seen. When he raised his voice for the first time, she packed her bags without hesitation. He begged her to stay, promised change, promised everything. She loved him, but she loved herself more. Years later, she watched him from afar, sober, calmer, changed. Leaving had broken his heart, but it had saved them both. Sometimes love's greatest act is knowing when to walk away. The old dog waited at the same grave every day. Rain, heat, time, nothing moved him. People tried to take him home, but he always returned. One evening, a little girl sat beside him and cried about her own loss. The dog rested his head on her knee. Two broken hearts found comfort in each other. When the dog finally lay down for the last time, he wasn't alone. Loyalty didn't die. It simply changed shape. He had built his life on lies so well crafted that even he believed them. When the truth finally surfaced, everything collapsed. His job, his marriage, his reputation. Alone in an empty apartment, he faced the man he had been running from. Starting over at 40 wasn't heroic. It was humiliating. But honesty gave him something lies never had, peace. The life he rebuilt was smaller, quieter, and real. For the first time, he could breathe. She was told she would never walk again. At first, hope felt like a cruel joke. Therapy hurt more than the accident ever had. There were days she screamed, days she quit, days she wanted to disappear. Then one morning, she stood, just for a second. That second became a minute, then a step, then a future. One night, her mother tucked her into bed, brushed the hair from her forehead, and whispered a promise that sounded ordinary at the time. "I'll always come back." By morning, the house was silent in a way that felt unnatural, like it was holding its breath. The cupboard doors were open, clothes missing, the air still carrying the faint scent of jasmine her mother loved. Her father sat at the table staring into a cold cup of tea, his face frozen, his voice empty when he said, "She's gone." No explanation followed. No stories softened the truth. Just absence. Years passed, and the absence hardened into something sharp. She learned not to ask questions because questions made people uncomfortable. Neighbors avoided her eyes. Teachers spoke gently as if her heart were fragile glass. She grew up believing abandonment was something you earned, like a punishment for being unlovable. Her father worked long hours and spoke little. At night, she would lie awake listening to the walls creak, imagining footsteps that never came. She promised herself she would never need anyone enough to be left behind. When she was 26, her father died quietly in his sleep. The grief felt familiar, almost rehearsed. While sorting through his belongings, she found a small locked box hidden behind old books. Inside was a worn diary wrapped in cloth, the pages yellowed and trembling in her hands. It was her mother's. She hesitated before opening it, afraid of what truth might undo the story she had lived with for nearly 2 decades. But curiosity outweighed fear. The first entry was dated 3 weeks before her mother disappeared. "I don't know how to say goodbye to my child without breaking her forever." Her breath caught. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, and kept reading. The diary told a story she had never imagined. Her mother had been sick. Not the kind of sickness that announces itself loudly, but the quiet kind that eats away at you slowly. The doctors had been clear. Treatment was expensive, uncertain, and long. Her father had begged her mother to try anyway, but the cost would have destroyed them, their home, their child's future. So her mother made a choice. She wrote about selling her jewelry, borrowing money in secret, traveling to a distant city where no one knew her. She wrote about working through pain so her daughter could continue school, without knowing hunger or fear. She wrote about watching from a distance once, standing across the street from the school, seeing her daughter laugh with friends, and walking away before she was seen. "I wanted to run to her. I wanted to hold her so badly it hurt more than the disease. But love is not always staying. Sometimes love is leaving so quietly that no one ever knows what it cost." Tears blurred the words. Her hands shook. The final entries grew weaker, the handwriting uneven. "If you ever read this, my sweet girl, please forgive me. I was afraid that watching me die would steal your light. I chose to disappear so you could grow without learning how cruel goodbye can be. I hope one day you understand that every step I took away from you was the hardest step of my life." There were no more entries after that. She closed the diary and pressed it to her chest, a sound breaking free from her that was half sob, half breath. All the years of anger, the walls she had built, the belief that she had been unwanted, it all cracked at once. That night, she dreamed of her mother for the first time in years. Not as a fading memory, but vivid and warm, smiling without sadness. In the weeks that followed, she found herself changing in ways she hadn't expected. She noticed how easily she pulled away from people when things felt too close. How quickly she assumed the worst when someone was late or silent. For the first time, she understood where that fear came from. Understanding didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. She visited her mother's grave, a simple stone with a name and 2 dates too close together. Sitting there, she spoke aloud everything she had never said. Her anger, her longing, her gratitude. The wind moved gently through the trees, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. Months later, when love entered her life unexpectedly, she didn't run. She was terrified, but she stayed. She learned that loving someone didn't mean guaranteeing they would never leave. It meant choosing to be present anyway. One evening, sitting with the man she loved, she told him the truth about her past, her voice steady even when her heart wasn't. He listened without interrupting, then reached for her hand and held it as if it mattered. In that moment, she realized something her younger self never could have understood. Her mother had never abandoned her. She had loved her so fiercely that she vanished to protect her future. And now, carrying that love forward, she finally allowed herself to believe she was worth staying for.